Hey, what's going on, my goats? Scotty here, and ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the channel. We got some good stuff planned. Today we're starting out with an absolute banger. Today we are starting off the channel by reviewing Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Let's just not waste any time. Let's get right into it. Oh, and be aware! I might spoil the 3,000-year-old story, okay? Alright? There are spoilers in this review! I don't want to hear it. The story's 3,000 years old. I was spoiled it way before this movie was coming out, okay? This is how the cookie crumbles. You've been warned. You've been warned. I'm talking to you. So where do I begin? I loved this film so much. This is Christopher Nolan's 13th feature film, and it is also the first film to ever be filmed entirely in IMAX 70mm. That is a big deal. This movie is literally filmmaking history. It is incredible. And I was lucky enough to see it in IMAX 70mm. I have a full IMAX 70mm theater about 40 minutes away from my house. I made the trip, and oh boy, let me tell you, Bubba, it was worth it. If you decide to see this movie in a regular theater and you have a full IMAX theater nearby, you are doing yourself a complete disservice by not seeing this movie in the biggest screen possible. It's so good. I'm literally speechless right now. I don't know. I highly recommend that you make the drive, that you buy the tickets in advance to see any of these movies that are filmed with IMAX cameras actually in IMAX. It elevates the experience to a level that you'll only truly understand if you actually go. It's a Christopher Nolan film. He literally made IMAX, basically. It is incredible. If you know Christopher Nolan, you're going to know that throughout any of his movies, basically, you're going to be wined and dined with some of the most incredible, breathtaking camera shots, cinematography imaginable. The entire movie, its camera work, its color grading, its framing, it is all beautiful. It is all perfect. There's not a single shot in this movie that I was like, wow, that kind of looked like ass. Like, it all looks so good. I guarantee it. This film, from a cinematography standpoint, it is breathtaking. It is beautiful. And then also to couple this cinematography on top of great choreography, actual set pieces, filming on location, it all adds up to make this very grand and epic movie. But then Christopher Nolan also ends up kind of grounding the story. Well, don't get me wrong, he still gives some of the Greek mythology, but he kind of grounds it in a way that I'll get into, and it all works pretty well in my opinion. Dude, the sack of Troy scene, they all pull out of the Trojan horse, just wreck it. That scene is so cool, man. The lighting, the sneakiness, Ludwig Göransson's thumping score that just gets louder and louder and louder and more intense and more intense and more intense. It is incredible. It is probably one of the best scenes I will ever see in a movie theater, is watching that scene in IMAX. It is so cool. It is really great. Another thing that shouldn't be anything new to you if you know who Christopher Nolan is as a filmmaker is he highly disapproves of the use of CGI. He uses CGI as little as possible. Almost the entirety of this film is practical effects and puppeting and things of that kind of nature. And that is something I highly respect out of Christopher Nolan, is he never takes the easy way out with CGI. And there are some scenes that you will watch and you're like, how the hell did he do this without CGI? Like, for example, the Cyclops scene towards the start of the movie. It's the first like mythological creature you see in this film, made with a giant puppet. And then of course they still do like their editing to make it look a lot realer. Of course there is still some editing they have to do to make it look lifelike and human-like. To see parts of the giant puppet on the screen, like the giant hands grabbing some of Odysseus's men and eating them, it is like, whoa. Like, if it was done in CGI, it would, in my opinion, be pretty corny, kind of cheesy. Being able to use the puppets and the use of practical effects and all like that, it makes the experience so much more immersive and real feeling to the audience. It was tense. It was crazy. And the design for the Cyclops is creepy, and the noises it makes, creepy. It is all done so well. Another great example of this is the Circe scene. Circe, if you don't know, is a woman who was given a gift by the gods to turn human beings into animals, pretty much. And Odysseus and his men ended up pulling up to her island, and his men go up there because they're really hungry. They want some food from her. And she ends up turning them into pigs. And the fact that the scene was done with zero CGI is incredible. Like, it makes for one of the most realistic and unnerving scenes I have ever seen in a non-horror movie. It is genuinely, like, it's intense. It's unnerving. It actually made me, like, ick. It made me react. And that's not something a lot of films can do nowadays. I'm so happy Christopher Nolan was the one to be able to tackle some of these scenes in the fashion that he does it, because of his commitment to doing things the hard way and not taking the easy way out. I respect it hella. To move on, this is a bit of a controversial take. So I do want to applaud this film's narrative and messaging. I've seen a lot of complaints about how this film kind of steers away from a lot of parts of the poem as far as Odysseus's character and the themes and messages it's conveying are very different from the poem. And keep this in mind, I do own the poem. I have not read the poem yet. So keep that in mind when I say this. This is coming from someone who I understand what happens in the poem, but I haven't actually read it. So I do want to applaud the message, especially the concept of Zeus's law, which, if I understand correctly, isn't that big of a thing in the actual poem. But for those of you that don't know, Zeus's law is basically, it was a law that was believed back then where a host needs to treat their guests with respect, and the guests in turn need to honor that respect and the host. If either side breaks that, it's seen as insulting to the gods, and it is believed that whoever breaks this law will receive karmic retribution in a way. The way that they discuss Zeus's law throughout the film, I think, is really interesting. And I'm not saying that the discussion is perfect, because there are some parts of the movie that completely contrast the whole message of Zeus's law, but I do find it all very interesting and rewarding in the end, as an overall story. It ties the whole story together very neatly in a very nice way. And it does also lead into discussion if the gods are really real. And it feels like a lot of the characters in this story, or not a lot of them, but especially Odysseus, he kind of has this atheist view towards the gods. And to see that view kind of change and shift throughout the movie is very interesting, because another big change from the poem that I've seen a lot of discourse about is the way Nolan changes Odysseus's character. In this story, his character is a lot less confident and arrogant and egotistical, and he is instead very somber in a way, and he's struggling from PTSD from the Trojan War. And as the movie develops, you see more and more of what kind of caused this PTSD, and especially on his journey home, you see even more of that PTSD, and then he starts to relearn who he is, and then he eventually goes back to Ithaca to reclaim his throne. Covering the PTSD in a setting like Greece from way back then is a very interesting concept, because normally when a filmmaker decides they want to make a film talking about PTSD and kind of studying it, it's normally World War II, Vietnam, eras like that. So to see discussion where that could have still been a thing way back then, when they were supposedly fighting over a woman's beauty, that is very interesting to me. And this film also does discuss, I was kind of surprised it discussed this, it discusses how they were using Helen of Troy's beauty as an excuse, and what Agamemnon was really fighting for was the trade routes. I think that's a very interesting concept. I think that's a very real thing that they were probably actually fighting for way back then when the Trojan War was a thing. And seeing how that theory around just, oh, they were fighting because she was so hot, it's very interesting. Another thing about Odysseus's PTSD is I felt that it makes Odysseus feel a lot more human. So to give Odysseus, this grand warrior and king, this very human emotion, and he was human, but to give him this very like more common feeling and emotion of like PTSD and trauma now, it's something very interesting that was explored, and I really appreciated it. I've also seen a lot of hate regarding the historical accuracy in the film. I've seen a lot of complaints about things like the costume design and the ships, and even the use of like bows and swords and axes and things like that. And I think that those criticisms, while justified if you are someone that really cares about history, are kind of silly in the grand scheme of things, because and again, I want to say, if you care about historical accuracy in films, I have nothing against that, of course, and I totally understand your anger in a way. But I think if you're someone like Christopher Nolan and you're trying to make this film in a way where like general audiences can find it accessible while still making your thought-provoking kind of weird Christopher Nolan messaging, I can see why Nolan would go ahead and make the armor look badass, because I've seen what the Greek armor would have actually looked like, and I don't think general audiences would have really found it all that cool. I think they would have found it kind of lame. So to make like Agamemnon's armor, he has so much aura, bro. And even though it's not like completely historical accurate, I can totally see why Christopher Nolan would go the cool route instead of the historically accurate route, because to general audiences, they're not going to care about the use of a bow or the look of the armor or the look of the ship. Oh, it's a Viking ship. It's a Viking ship. Like, the general audience just wants to be impressed and they want to see something cool. So while I understand that people are irritated about that, I don't think Christopher Nolan would be the kind of director like Robert Eggers or Mel Gibson to go out of his way to make it historical accurate for those historical accurate people. And I mean, the armor looks badass. Like, if you just take your thoughts away from the historical accuracy for a second, you really just appreciate how cool it all is. And I do really think that was the smarter decision. Another thing I see getting a lot of hate in this film is the score. I've seen a lot of complaints that it's too weird or kind of repetitive in a way. And I actually find the score very interesting. Basically, what Christopher Nolan did was he went to Ludwig Göransson, I hope is saying his name right, and he said, for this film, I don't want you to use an orchestra. Orchestras didn't exist back then. And also, I do want to say that I totally understand your arguments for the historical accurate people if you're going to say, well, why would he stop at the music in the background rather than doing the armor and stuff? I do think that is a logical and reasonable argument. And that is a justified argument as well. But I find it really interesting how he was able to do something really different with his score than he's done in any other films by doing this, because the direction they end up going, in my opinion, it not only helps set the mood for all of the scenes, but it also helps immerse the viewer even more in the setting that the film is based in by not using an orchestra and instead having to go to like banging on certain things to get to different noises and stuff like that. But I will say that Travis Scott song at the end of the movie is terrible. It is ass. Right as that song came on, I was like, oh, I'm walking straight out. It was so bad that I don't know what they were thinking putting that at the end of the movie. It's not a good song. It sounds awful. Yeah, anyways, I think that the score really helps immerse you in the entire experience, and it's something that I applauded. I think it worked really well. I can understand you thinking it's a little weird compared to a lot of normal movie soundtracks, but I will also admit I do think that the normal Christopher Nolan score started getting super repetitive, and it was very refreshing to see him have a new take on something like the score in the back of his movies instead of the normal like Interstellar or Tenet or just like wow kind of scores that you would normally hear in the background of his scenes. Okay, now for this next segment, I want to finish my praises, and then I also want to start bringing up some of the flaws I have in this film. So I want to start off by just giving a praise to a few performances that I really enjoyed in the film. I think Matt Damon did an incredible job portraying this version of Odysseus that Christopher Nolan decided to go with. I do also want to praise Anne Hathaway. I think that her performance is really good. She has some of the most emotional scenes in the whole film, and they stick and they work really well. Robert Pattinson plays a really good villain, but he's not a villain in the sense of he's actually menacing. He plays a really good coward in a way. And I think that this is a role that was kind of made for Robert Pattinson, And I do think that Robert Pattinson, he's getting into that era where I'm going to watch anything Robert Pattinson is in. He is in such a generational run recently, and every role he's in anymore is just so good and so interesting. His vocal range, his acting range, it's all just phenomenal, man. I love Robert Pattinson's work. Getting into the contrast of that, starting to get into the cons I have with this movie, the flaws that I have, is there were some performances that just did not land and took me out of the immersion of some of the scenes. Like, for example, Travis Scott. Why is Travis Scott in this movie? Like, given he's not in it for long, he's in it for maybe like 2 minutes at most. And it really, like, Travis Scott's performance does nothing to affect my overall thought of the film. But when he is in it, I'm just like, that's Travis Scott. Why? And he only has a few lines. I'm not saying it's the biggest deal, but it is very off-putting in a way to see him on there, and it does take you out of the immersion of the film. I do also think that Elliot Page and Himesh Patel were both terrible castings in this film, not because of who they are as people or what they represent. I do want to point that out, but like Elliot Page is just not a convincible Greek soldier. I don't understand what she's doing in this Greek armor. She weighs 90 pounds soaking wet. That again takes me completely out of the immersion of the film, because there's no way that this person would be a Greek soldier. I do like what they did with the character of Sinon and their relationship with Odysseus throughout the movie, but again, it just should have been anyone else, like someone that actually looks like a Greek soldier should, you know? And then Himesh Patel, he's just not a good actor, in my opinion. Every scene in this movie, he's not acting, he's just reciting lines. Like, when he's speaking, it's hard to get through that. Like, he doesn't feel like he believes he's in this story. He's just kind of there, standing there, saying it. It doesn't feel like he's his character. He's just an actor saying lines, if that makes sense, and I wasn't a big fan of it. Zendaya allegedly plays Athena, but she might not even be Athena if you've seen the ending. But in the whole movie, she has very few lines, and most of the movie is just her doing the same smolder she does in all of her roles, and I'm getting very sick of it. And I think that if she had more lines in this movie, it wouldn't have been much of an effect, but for most of the movie, she's just sitting there at Odysseus like... I'm just like, bro, stop that. And I want to say Tom Holland, he's not terrible. He still does have some powerful scenes, like when Odysseus finally comes back and Telemachus realizes that Odysseus is his father instead of some beggar, and he knows because Odysseus's dog waited for him to get home for him to die. When he sees the dog die and he realizes, wait, you're not a beggar, you're my father, you're Odysseus. I'm not gonna lie, I shed a couple tears. That was a really powerful scene. But overall, he's just Peter Parker. And I wish we could have seen more range in a movie like this from Tom Holland. And I think that that is a small detriment to the film. I do have a couple critiques as well when it comes to the narrative result revolving around Zeus's Law. And I do think I love the discussion around Zeus's Law, but then there are some scenes that completely contrast it. They just completely brush past how Zeus's Law didn't affect certain characters. Like, for example, the Cyclops. The Odysseus and his men were technically guests in the Cyclops cave, so the Cyclops needs to, like, invite them in and treat them well and feed them. But instead, the Cyclops walks in without saying anything and just starts eating dudes. According to Zeus's Law, he needs to have punishment. He needs to have that karmic retribution. But instead what happens is Odysseus and his men end up stabbing his eye and they escape. And while the scene is still very good and very tense, Odysseus and his men are the ones that get punished despite them not being the first ones that broke Zeus's Law. And technically, yes, I guess they still broke it in a way, but the Cyclops was the first one breaking Zeus's Law. And the Cyclops is Poseidon's son, it turns out. So maybe it's just like the Cyclops is lucky for being Poseidon's son. But that is one thing where I was like, well, what about Zeus's Law? And then another thing is the Circe scene. And again, this might be a bit more of a controversial take. Her men, or Odysseus's men, pull up to Circe's house asking for food. And she's already freaking out, like, oh, you guys are going to hurt me, you guys are hurt me. They assure her, we are not going to hurt you, we're not going to do anything to you. And then she starts feeding them, and that's when she starts turning them into pigs, and they never did anything wrong to her. So again, she welcomed them into her home and broke Zeus's law by turning them into pigs. And again, she's just never punished for it. And instead, what happens is they turn it into this giant feminist speech that she gives to Odysseus about how all men are pigs, and oh well, they would have done something because men are pigs, and I'm just turning into their true form. And I'm just like, okay, so not only are we completely going against what this whole movie has been telling us should be happening when you break Zeus's law, but now also we're also making it like an anti-male, all men are evil, all men are pigs, they were going to abuse me. Even though they assured her we're just here for food, remember Zeus's law, stuff like that. So I'm just kind of like, okay, so now we're to the point where we're preaching this instead of following the like rules that the movie has presented us, which did break me out of the immersion a little bit. And then when Odysseus eventually convinces her to turn them back into their humans, she's over here saying like, go back to your disguises, which is basically implying that their human form is a disguise for the pigs that they are. And I was just like, man, shut up. That scene really annoyed me. Lastly, I want to point out that the sound mixing, a lot like every other Christopher Nolan movie, did have a lot of issues. There would be times where there's water running and I can't hear anything that the characters are saying because of how loud the water is. Or like another example, you hear the score in the background and it's just so loud that you can't really hear some of the characters. And it doesn't happen a whole lot. And like some of the time it's just like characters yelling like, onward, like, let's get these Trojans, but the music is so loud that you can't really make out what they're saying. But it is another thing that just kind of like breaks you out of the immersion because you can't really hear what's going on. Just like some technical issues that I do wish would have been solved by now, considering it's a Christopher Nolan movie and these are already problems that he's had in the past. But then at the same time, you can also kind of anticipate that this is a problem that might happen in the movie because of continuing trends in Christopher Nolan films. And now, while it does sound like these criticisms are kind of dogging on the movie a lot, in the grand scheme of the whole 3-hour runtime, they really don't do that much to help me take the score down. They are things that I wish could have gone differently, but overall, throughout the whole movie, they don't really matter that much. And now, with all of that being said, I did review this movie 4.5 out of 5 stars on my Letterboxd. I have the Letterboxd link in the description if you want to go check that out. And I highly recommend this movie, especially if you're going to watch this movie in 70mm IMAX. This is the movie to watch in IMAX. Like, there has not been a bigger movie for the IMAX format than this movie. This movie is historic. And even if you do have problems with the narrative and the actual like adaptation of the Odyssey, this movie is still worth checking out because I do think that this is one of Nolan's best films. I think that this is one of the best movies of the year. I will have to rewatch it, and I will have to rewatch movies like Obsession and Project Hail Mary to see which one I actually think is my favorite. But those three are definitely my top 3 for 2026 so far. They are all fantastic movies. Anyways, those are my thoughts on the movie. If you agree, if you disagree, leave a comment. If you want to discuss what you thought of the movie, I would love to talk about it in the comment section as well. If you liked the review, thanks so much for watching, especially if you've made it this far. If you would like and subscribe if you liked it, that would mean the world to me. I do also plan on, in the next week or two, coming out with a video of me giving my ranking of every Christopher Nolan feature film. If you would love to stick around for that, that would mean the world for me. I would just recommend you put the subscribe button down and the notification button down so that you don't miss it. And yeah, anyways, I would love to see y'all again. Thanks so much for giving me your time of day. With all that being said, I love y'all. Y'all are the absolute goats, and I'll see you later. Peace out.